I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Yes or no, was bicycle clothing found with Suzanne Morphew's remains? Yes or no? Please leave your answer in the comments. Well, according to Barry's attorneys, the answer is yes. In an article published by 9 News, quote, her biking clothes were found with her remains, according to Barry's attorney and the autopsy report. And do you remember this note that Barry left behind at the Poncha Springs General Store? And he was describing what Suzanne wore when she mountain biked. Baby blue bike helmet and then biking clothing. Now it's interesting that Barry emphasizes the baby blue bike helmet. He uses at least 2 descriptors for the helmet and then adds biking clothing almost as an afterthought. The gap between the word helmet and also the size of the writing describing the helmet also show just how much the author prioritizes the one over the other. But what does the autopsy say? Does it mention biking clothing anywhere? The answer is no. The first reference from the autopsy report actually questions the recovery of the bicycle and helmet in terms of being without significant damage in separate locations. I also think the psychology of the bicycle and helmet found in separate locations is psychological allegory for Suzanne's body being placed somewhere before being moved to Moffat. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, none of the clothing items listed in the autopsy report are explicitly or even tacitly described as bicycle clothing. Not the gloves, not the shirt, not the shorts, and there are no shoes. Again, let me emphasize, there is no classic cycling clothing mentioned, no padded shorts, no cycling gloves, no cycling shirts. The word bicycle doesn't appear in the autopsy report. Most curious of all is that Suzanne is not only found without the most distinctive aspect when it comes to cycling gear, which is cycling shoes, but there are no shoes whatsoever. Now, it must be pointed out that Suzanne was an intermediate biker who used a camelback. She had quite a good bike, a Santa Cruz. She had teal-colored clipless pedals, and what that means is she would have cycled with a particular kind of shoe and socks. So where are they? Want to know my theory? First of all, I don't think Suzanne was buried once near Moffat. I think she was temporarily buried somewhere else first. Second, a bare footprint was made in the dirt of Barry's bobcat. This was possibly Suzanne's bare foot when laid on the ground. And so one does wonder, was the bobcat used in the initial burial, and was the initial burial fairly close to Puma Path? Third, I think someone is trying to make it look like Suzanne was wearing cycling clothing, just as the bicycle is made to look like an accident. But Suzanne's clothing tended to match her pedal color and helmet. It was a teal color. Also in the affidavit, Barry does sometimes refer to Suzanne as a matcher, that she would tend to wear similar colored clothing together. And that does tend to be how cyclists dress. The clothing found but with her remains is a smorgasbord of mismatched clothing. Not Suzanne's style, I would wager. Also, Suzanne's blue Camelback water pack was found in her vehicle. She often took selfies with herself using it, and there is no water bottle found with the bicycle, nor is there a cage to hold it. No one goes mountain biking without taking water along, which strongly indicates the whole biking thing is a ruse and was staged. When Barry was asked to describe Suzanne's cycling clothing, he was oddly vague. He described it at one point as a wind jacket or windbreaker, without providing any additional detail, no color, no brand. The first thing the cops seized on Mother's Day were Suzanne's cycling shorts. One wonders if those weren't seized, would they have been placed by or with Suzanne's body? That's the other thing. The clothing was placed with her body, not as though the remains were sort of through the clothing. It's also possible that the killer saw this, the seizing of clothing, and thought that this strongly suggested, where she was, the significance of the clothing, and that the clothing could further tell the story of where Suzanne was when she died. Now, what do you think it would suggest if the clothing she was wearing was a towel and a bathing costume? What would that tell you? Now, the trouble is the items mentioned in her autopsy don't suggest that she was cycling, especially the crested butt hoodie. That's definitely not cycling clothing. Also, did you know the towel on which Suzanne was lying when suntanning, when she was last seen, has never been recovered? Now, I know what you're thinking. You might say Suzanne didn't have cycling clothing, or that it's not a big deal for her to wear something else. Well, I'm a mountain biker and I only wear mountain biking gear. I would never wear a hoodie because it would catch on rocks or branches. I wouldn't wear other shorts than cycling shorts. I wouldn't wear other shoes. I wouldn't use other gloves. Also, in Suzanne's own social media, we can clearly see that Suzanne has mountain biking clothing, breathable fabric shirts, and cycling gloves. The light color leather work glove mentioned in the autopsy also doesn't sound like a cycling glove, or they would have referenced it as a cycling glove and not a work glove. I think whoever staged the bicycle also staged the second burial near Moffat to reinforce the idea that Suzanne was riding her bike when she was taken. This staging involved the use of Suzanne's clothing. The only problem was that none of it was cycling kit, possibly because the cops had confiscated or seized all of it. So if the person did want to use her clothing to stage the whole thing, to say, well, she was killed while she was cycling, well, all of that clothing was confiscated as far as we know. The killer probably thought that if the body was ever found, the passage of time would make the material hard to recognize, but it does seem it is important to the killer that there be clothing found with her, because what would it suggest if there wasn't clothing? And that is with the exception of cycling shoes. Cycling shoes contain plastic, carbon fiber, metal. None of that degrades very quickly. But why are those shoes missing? Well, isn't it because Suzanne never went cycling that morning? Does that make sense? And so when we talk about the biggest clue we've all missed, what I'm sort of angling at is this idea that, first of all, the body was moved, because I really don't think she was buried before Barry went to Broomfield. I don't think that is when it took place. And that's the one aspect. The other aspect is that I think the idea of the clothing giving you some indication of the circumstances of her death was something that the killer hadn't considered, and as a result, the clothing that you found with it was there. I also think it's very interesting that Barry's lawyer specifically say that is bicycle clothing. Do you think it is? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.